The trouble started the moment Wade Thatcher saw the woman in the burgundy dress step off the noon train. He felt something in his chest tighten, not from admiration, but from the sudden knowledge that nothing about this day would go the way he planned. The stranger looked straight at him like she already knew he was her destiny, her disaster, or both. And for the first time in years, the rich rancher who controlled everything in his world felt the ground shift under his boots. Wade had spent the morning preparing for a young, quiet bride from back east. Someone soft-spoken, someone obedient, someone 20. That was what he paid for and what he needed, or at least what he told himself he needed. The Rocking T Ranch was a huge piece of land outside Cedar Ridge, Texas, and a man like him required a wife who understood her place and didn't ask questions. A wife who could give him children and fill the empty rooms Martha left behind. But the woman stepping onto the platform was no girl. She was a storm wrapped in curves and confidence. Her burgundy dress hugged her like it was made for her alone. Her dark hair was pinned up, but a few strands fell loose in the warm wind, dancing around her cheeks. And her eyes, sharp, amber, alive, locked onto Wade like she'd been waiting her whole life to challenge him. Wade felt the weight of the town watching, waiting to see the bride he ordered in the newspaper. But instead of the shy young woman he imagined, they were staring at this bold stranger who looked like she belonged in a New Orleans ballroom, not dusty Cedar Ridge. She walked toward him, each step measured and sure. The wooden platform creaked under her boots. The town women whispered behind their hands. Men pretended not to stare. And Wade felt heat rising under his collar. Part anger, part something he didn't want to name. "Mr. Thatcher," she said, her voice smooth and warm with a hint of a southern drawl. "I'm Ruby Mae Dawson." Wade stared at her, jaw tightening. "You're not 20. Her lips curved, not into a friendly smile, but one that dared him to say more. "And you're not a poet, Mr. Thatcher. Your letter made you sound far gentler than this." He didn't laugh. He didn't even blink. "You lied." "So did you," she replied calmly. "You advertised for a young bride without saying a word about wanting someone you could control. If you'd been honest, you wouldn't have found me." The crowd leaned in closer, pretending to shop or stroll or admire horses, anything to stay near enough to hear the wildfire starting on the platform. Wade wanted to turn around, climb into his wagon, and leave her standing there. This woman, this stranger, was everything he didn't want. Too bold, too strong, too much. She didn't lower her gaze like a proper young bride. She didn't blush or tremble. She met him eye to eye, daring him to reject her. "The next train east leaves in 3 days," Wade said stiffly. "I'll pay for your room and ticket." Ruby raised a brow. "And run home like a coward? No. I traveled all this way for a new life. I won't walk away because you're disappointed." He opened his mouth to argue, but she stepped closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "The town is watching, Mr. Thatcher. You want them gossiping about how the great Wade Thatcher ordered a bride and sent her back before sundown?" Wade's teeth clenched. She was right. Every pair of eyes on Main Street was locked on them. Turning her away publicly would stain his name worse than taking her home. "Get your bags," he growled. He grabbed her heavy trunk, shocked by the weight, and walked toward the wagon. Ruby followed with her chin held high, ignoring the town stares. The ride to the ranch felt longer than usual. Wade kept his eyes on the road. Ruby watched everything. The hills rolling like waves, the distant cattle grazing, the giant sky stretching forever. "This is pretty land," she said softly. Wade said nothing. "You built it yourself." "With my own hands," he answered, unable to hide the pride. "It shows." Those two simple words struck him harder than he expected. Martha used to say things like that, quiet praise that warmed him. Ruby said it differently, calm, sure, like she saw right through everything he tried to hide. When they reached the Rocking T, the ranch hands pretended to work while stealing glances. Ruby stepped down from the wagon, brushing dust from her dress. "It's bigger than I imagined," she whispered. Wade pointed toward the house. "You'll stay here until the train comes, that's all." She turned to him, eyes steady. I'm not leaving, Wade. I didn't travel 2,000 miles to be dismissed like an inconvenience. You don't get to decide that. Ruby stepped closer, close enough for him to smell a hint of jasmine clinging to her skin. I already have. Wade hated the way his heartbeat stumbled, hated the way she made the air feel too warm, hated the way she refused to fear him. This woman was trouble, deep, unstoppable trouble. And she had just walked into his life like she meant to stay. Ruby Dawson hadn't been on the ranch more than a few hours before Wade realized something dangerous. She didn't scare easily. Not of him, not of the ranch, not of the life she'd stepped into without permission. And that made her exactly the kind of storm his quiet world wasn't prepared for. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Wade heard movement in the kitchen. He wasn't expecting anyone. Maria, the housekeeper, wouldn't arrive for another hour. Ruby should have been asleep in the small guest room he'd given her. But when Wade walked in, tying the last button of his shirt, he found her standing barefoot on the cool wooden floor, wearing one of Martha's old aprons tied over a simple blue dress. She was making biscuits. Real ones, not the hard, tasteless lumps the ranch hands baked on long cattle drives, but soft, rising, golden biscuits that filled the house with a smell he hadn't felt since Martha died. Ruby glanced over her shoulder as he stepped in. Morning. Wade froze. For a moment, he didn't even recognize the warmth in the air, the crackle of the stove, the smell of butter, and something else, something gentler, something like home. Why are you cooking? He asked too sharply. Because men who work as hard as your hands shouldn't start their day on an empty stomach, she replied, brushing flour from her cheek. Coffee's ready. Quote, she said it like she lived here, like she belonged here. Wade didn't know whether to be impressed or furious. You don't need to do that, he said stiffly. I know, Ruby answered, kneading dough with strong, sure hands, but I want to earn my keep. You're only here 2 more days. Ruby didn't look up. Are you sure about that? His jaw tightened. I'm not changing my mind. She slid the biscuits into the oven. We'll see. That phrase, those 2 little words, sparked something in him, not anger, not admiration, something tangled and unsettling. He walked out before she could see the way her confidence shook him. Outside, the ranch buzzed to life. Horses whinnied, cattle moved in slow waves across the fields, and the warm Texas sky stretched out like a promise. But Wade's thoughts kept drifting back to the woman in his kitchen. The men noticed too. Tom Garrett, his oldest ranch hand, nudged him while they checked the water troughs. Heard someone made biscuits this morning. Yep, Wade muttered, smelled good enough to make a dying man sit up and eat. Yep, quote. Tom chuckled. You gonna tell me who she is, or should I guess? She's nobody. Tom raised a brow. Nobody don't make biscuits like that. Wade decided right then he hated that Ruby had walked into his home and stirred up interest he didn't want. But the truth was, she stirred up everything. By mid-morning, Wade found her outside sweeping the porch. Her blue dress fluttered in the warm breeze, and the sun lit the brown and gold strands in her hair like fire. You packed yet? Wade asked, not planning to. You need to leave tomorrow. Ruby rested the broom against the railing and stepped closer. Tell me why. Wade opened his mouth, ready to list his reasons, her lies, the town, his expectations, but none of it came out. Because every excuse felt hollow under the sharp, knowing weight of her amber eyes. So he said the only thing he could. You're not the woman I advertised for. Ruby smiled, slow, confident, devastating, and maybe that's a good thing. It wasn't. It couldn't be. But his heartbeat didn't agree. Before he could argue, a cloud of dust appeared on the horizon. A rider headed straight toward the ranch at a fast pace. Wade moved automatically, stepping in front of Ruby. Tom shaded his eyes. Looks like trouble. The rider approached, a young man from town, face pale and breathless. He pulled up hard, dust swirling around him. Mr. Thatcher, he called. Sheriff says rustlers hit the Benson Ranch last night. Says to watch your herds. They might be headed your way. Wade stiffened. Rustlers were wolves in human skin. They stole cattle, burned land, and slit throats when cornered. Get the men, Wade ordered. We ride now. He turned to Ruby, expecting fear, but Ruby wasn't afraid. She stepped forward, chin high. "What can I do?" Wade shook his head. "This isn't your place." "Your men are riding out," Ruby said. "Someone needs to stay behind and guard the house." He almost laughed at the thought of her standing against armed thieves. But then she said something that made him stop cold. "I've had to defend myself before, Wade. You'd be surprised what I can handle." Quote. There it was again, that shadow behind her eyes, that past she carried in silence. Wade didn't know what she meant, not yet. But it struck him that this woman had lived through things no one her age should have. Maybe she wasn't 20. Maybe she wasn't modest. Maybe she wasn't innocent. But she was strong. And God help him, that scared him more than anything. "Stay in the house," he told her quietly. "Lock the doors. Don't come out unless you see me." Ruby held his gaze. "Come back alive." He didn't promise anything. Men who fought rustlers didn't make promises they might not keep. As he mounted Tempest, his powerful black stallion, Wade glanced back one last time. Ruby stood on the porch, wind whipping her dress, watching him ride out. She looked like a woman who had already decided her fate was tied to his, whether he wanted that or not. Wade kicked his heels into Tempest's sides and led his men toward danger, dust rising behind them like smoke. And Ruby Dawson, the storm he didn't ask for, the woman he couldn't control, watched him disappear into the wild Texas horizon. Already fearing she had more to lose than she ever expected, the wind howled across the plains as Wade and his men tracked the rustlers through the red dirt canyons. Tempest's hooves struck hard against the rocky ground, carrying Wade closer to danger, closer to the lawless men who had stolen cattle and threatened everything he owned. But even amid the chaos of the chase, his thoughts kept drifting back to Ruby. That woman, the curvy stranger who had barged into his life, had changed everything. She'd stayed behind at the ranch, vulnerable yet unafraid. That thought alone made his blood boil with protective fury. Meanwhile, Ruby paced the porch of the Rocking T Ranch. Her eyes scanned the horizon, watching for any sign of trouble. The wind whipped her hair around her face, and her dress clung to her like armor. She felt alive. Alive in a way she hadn't since leaving New Orleans. A way that frightened her as much as it thrilled her. She wasn't going anywhere. Not now. Not while Wade was out there risking everything. Hours passed. Dust clouds rose from distant ridges, signaling the men's return. Wade emerged, sweat and blood mixing with the grime of the trail. Tempest snorted and shook his mane as the ranch hands gathered around. Wade's eyes searched the porch, finding Ruby watching him. Relief flickered across his face, quickly replaced by exhaustion. "You didn't run," he said, dismounting and coming to her side. "I never do," she replied simply, brushing dirt from her sleeves. Her amber eyes glimmered with that stubborn fire he couldn't tame. Wade took her hands in his, feeling the warmth, the certainty, the promise. "You shouldn't have stayed here alone," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "This land, these people, they'd never forgive it if anything happened to you." Ruby's lips curved in a half-smile. "I can handle myself. You should know that by now." He chuckled softly, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I should, shouldn't I?" His gaze softened. "But seeing you here, waiting, I can't describe how that feels." The days that followed were filled with hard work. The rustlers had been driven off, but Wade's near brush with danger had shaken them both. Ruby threw herself into the ranch's daily rhythms with purpose, learning everything from milking cows to managing the hands. Wade watched her from a distance at first, a man used to controlling every inch of his land, forced to accept her independence. It grated at him, but slowly he began to admire it. The woman he had wanted to control, the young bride he had imagined like a silent shadow, was gone. In her place stood someone vibrant, fierce, and untamable. One evening after supper, Ruby and Wade stood together on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the distant hills. The sky was painted in fiery hues, reflecting the storm and fire that had passed between them and settled into something steady, something enduring. "I should have sent you away that first day," Wade said quietly, breaking the silence. Ruby's hand found his, squeezing gently. "And I would have come back," she said, "even if you did." He laughed softly, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "You are impossible, Ruby Dawson." "And you are predictable," she teased, her grin bold. "But I like you anyway." Wade shook his head, smiling, despite the weight of the world he carried. "I wanted someone I could control. I wanted someone who fit the plan. But you aren't any of that, and somehow I don't mind." Ruby's laughter was soft, low, and full of warmth. "Good, because I don't plan on fitting anyone's plan, least of all yours." Time passed, seasons shifted, and the Rocking T Ranch flourished in ways Wade had never expected. Ruby became a part of the land itself, planting gardens, cooking meals that drew visitors from miles around, and earning the grudging respect of the town. Together, they transformed the ranch into something new, a home, a refuge, and a thriving inn for travelers along the Texas stage route. Then came the day when Ruby felt the first unmistakable flutter in her belly. Wade had been in the corral, mending fences. When she found him, her hands pressed to her stomach. "There's going to be a baby," she said, breathless with excitement and fear. Wade froze, staring at her as if the world had stopped. Then a slow, stunned grin spread across his face. "Our baby," he whispered, lifting her into his arms. He spun her around once, twice, before setting her down carefully, hands trembling with awe. God almighty, Ruby, we're going to be parents. The months that followed were a mix of anticipation, work, and preparation. Ruby adapted, learning to navigate her pregnancy while maintaining the ranch and inn. Wade was by her side every step, helping, worrying, supporting. When the day finally arrived, Ruby labored through the long hours, her hands gripping Wade's, their eyes locked, hearts pounding in tandem. When the cries of their newborn son finally filled the room, Wade's tears fell freely. Ruby held him close, overwhelmed by love and relief. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Welcome to the world." They named him William Thomas Thatcher, William for Wade's father, Thomas for the man who had become a grandfather figure at the ranch. As winter snow blanketed the Texas prairie, Ruby and Wade worked together, building a life from the ashes of their pasts. They ran the Rocking T Inn, cared for their son, and stood side by side against the small-town gossip and prejudice that had once threatened to tear them apart. One evening, as the fire crackled in the hearth, Wade held Ruby close, their son sleeping between them. "You're fire," he murmured. "You've changed me, Ruby, made me see life differently, made me see love differently." Ruby smiled, her head resting against his shoulder. "And you've given me home, a chance to be more than my past, a life worth living." Outside, the prairie stretched wide and white under the snow, quiet and endless. Inside, the Rocking T Ranch glowed with warmth, laughter, and the gentle hum of a family bound by choice, not circumstance. Ruby had come west to escape, but she had found something far greater: love, redemption, and a future she could finally call her own. And Wade? He had wanted a quiet young bride he could control. Instead, he had found a woman who could challenge him, inspire him, and love him with a fire that matched his own. Together, they had built a life neither could have imagined, one forged in the Wild West, where the sun was relentless, the land was vast, and love was worth every risk. Ruby Thatcher, the curvy stranger who defied every expectation, had changed everything. And Wade Thatcher, the rich rancher, had finally learned that what he wanted didn't matter nearly as much as what he needed. They were home, they were whole. And this was only the beginning.